We come back now to what I showed you before, the distribution of Armenians in the Y-DNA haplogroups. And now I'm going to talk about comparisons to other populations. And some of what you're going to see is probably going to surprise you here. Now, here's a comparison of Armenians to Assyrians and Chaldeans. Assyrians and Chaldeans speak a Semitic language. We speak an Indo-European language. And yet, the distribution of Y-DNA haplogroups is practically identical with both. This, plus other data that we have, shows that to a large extent they come from the same source population. When you look at the maternal DNA haplogroups of Armenians, this is what I showed you before, and you compare Armenians to Assyrians, Armenians in red and Assyrians and Chaldeans, of course, in blue, you see exactly the same things. If you compared us to, I don't know, Belgians or Spaniards or people from India, it would be completely different. But this shows that both on the paternal and maternal side, we have a lot of similarities to a group which speaks a very different language and which some people consider to be a sort of northern version of the Arabs, but it's not the case at all. Kurdish Jews on the right, Armenians on the left. And here again, we are struck with the similarities between the two groups. Most Mizrahi Jews, so not Ashkenazi or Sephardic Jews, but Jews who are from our region, from Kurdistan, from Iran, Iraq, there are some in Georgia, also Azerbaijan. They are very close in haplogroup distribution to the Armenians. But are they really close to us when you look at all the DNA? And here I come back to what I was discussing before. You can compare people's autosomal DNA. It won't tell you what groups they belong to, but it will tell you if there are affinities between different groups. And here is one study which came out about a year ago, which basically grouped people depending on their overall genetic makeup. And they found that Armenians, Georgians were quite similar. Turks were slightly on the periphery. This is people from the Caucasus. The Europeans closest to us are very often the Tuscans, Spaniards and Italians to some extent. The Near Easterners closest to us are the Cypriots and the Druze. And the Jews here in red, Ashkenazi Jews, Uzbekistan Jews, Azeri Jews, Georgian Jews, are very closely mixed. No Assyrians were used in that study, but I suspect that if they had been tested, they would have shown up right there in the middle. No Kurds either. When you get into the Arabs, it gets to be quite distant, of course. And the Asians are very far from this group. Here's another comparison that was done by another group of people. And here they found that Turks and Armenians were indistinguishable from an autosomal point of view. And that Assyrians, again, were very close, and that all of the Mizrahi Jews also were quite close to that group. The Georgians in this analysis separated a little bit, and the Arabs, of course, were more separate, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, the closest, again, being the Druze and the people from Syria and Cyprus. I'm not going to go into this chart in detail, but you can take people's overall DNA and break it out into regional components. South Asian, East African, West African. Armenians are one of these columns. I'll show you more detailed examples. And when you take very isolated populations, you can see that they are only one color. That's what you use to compare populations. And here's an analysis that was done of people from our region. Here are the Armenians. Here are the Assyrians. These are all speakers of Semitic languages. These are all speakers of non-Semitic languages. By and large, it shows that language and genetics, there is no correlation at all. Just because somebody speaks a Semitic language doesn't mean his ancestors were Arabs. Just because they speak an Indo-European language doesn't mean that they came from the heartland of the Indo-European languages. People's languages change all the time. What you can see here also is that Armenians and Assyrians, from an autosomal point of view, are very similar also. Not just Y DNA and maternal DNA, but also autosomal DNA. You see that Jews and Druze also are quite similar. You see that Iraqi Kurds and Iranians share a lot in common. And you see that Turks also belong by and large to another group, to the same type of mixes, but all of these people have an Asian component that we lack and that the Druze lack, but that the Iraqi Jews and Syrians have in small proportions. The Turks, not surprisingly, have a proportion of East European genes that most of the other populations do not have. And this is from their long occupation of the Balkan countries, Bulgaria, Macedonia, Greece, and all these places. A lot of people from this area were taken.